Really excited about today's webinar because we've got two amazing panelists on here. We got Matt Gingrich from Bombora, runs sales over at Bombora. And we got Pete Kazanji, CEO of Potential Energy. Is that what you're going by these days, or Modern Sales Pros? Or Founding Sales?
Too many things. Modern sales is probably the modern sales community is probably the best one.
And you've got a book coming out, right?
Yeah, if I ever finish it. Founding Sales, yeah, it's a book on sales for founders, written by a founder, me, who previously didn't know anything about sales and made all sorts of mistakes trying to figure it out. And then eventually got that and decided to write it down so other founders wouldn't slam their heads against the wall trying to do that. So yeah, it's like lessons learned.
Definitely much needed. I'm sure a bunch of people on here, I see CEO titles, head of sales titles. Obviously lots of early stage companies in the Sales Hacker Network. So you'll have to keep us posted to when you actually get around to finishing that book. But for today's webinar, we're talking about modern sales insights and how to drive accelerated growth. And we've got a couple kind of core topics here. So automated company targeting and sourcing, developing a sales rep day-to-day schedule, how to do POCs, proof of concepts, and do you need LinkedIn Sales Navigator? So we're actually going to be talking about kind of what are the pros and cons of paying for LinkedIn. So getting a lot deep into the data and your ideal customer profile and things like that. So we'll kick it off here with the first question. So automated company targeting and sourcing. What are the signals and things that you're looking for when you're putting together an automated company kind of sourcing process? Matt, we'll start with you. But we were talking before we got on here about some of the stuff you were learning about at Serious Decisions, recent event, and the things that you're doing at Bombora. But what are these signals? What are these like technographics and things like that you're looking for?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. Just for context, Serious Decisions, an advisory firm, helps some of us marketing sales folks in the B2B world. They had their big event last week, and they are the sort of developers of the demand waterfall. And they re-architected that waterfall, delivered it last week at the event to include two core stages that are really looking at what they're calling target demand as well as active demand. And so Pete made a good comment coming into this. There's the concept of who ought to be interested or engaged in our products and services right now. And then there are those that are actually demonstrating that interest. So you see tools out there and the ability to use predictive to understand what's the total addressable market that we could or should be focusing on. And then there are tools out there that do things like intent monitoring that say, okay, who's actually out there researching across the B2B web, across social, and perhaps even from a first party's perspective on our own web properties. And those are some of the tools that we've been engaging and using to build out our account list, to build out our targets.
Yeah. I think, so I remember when I kind of had this like realization at TalentBin. So the company that I previously ran before I started Potential Energy was a recruiting software company called TalentBin, and that was the place where I was figuring out sales. And we actually had a bunch of people who were former LinkedIn sales reps. And so, the LinkedIn sales organization was really fascinating insofar as like they had access to this insane database of like every prospect they could ever want to sell to, right? And so like the notion of knowing which accounts you should care about and who should care about you because they're hiring or they have the type of humans that are in the organization that would use your tool was really something that like we keyed off of by seeing what LinkedIn had done by taking their own data and then like porting it into Salesforce. And so really what it kind of comes down to is like you've got inbound marketing, of course, where like people find you, and that's great. And the guys at HubSpot, Mark Roberge, and folks like that have done a great job of popularizing that. But then there's that's really great if you can't proactively find the folks who should care about you. But there's actually lots of, because like we live in an internet world, there's actually lots of places where you can identify that stuff ahead of time, like which accounts ought to care about you. And there's actually like a variety of different ways you can do it. Like at TalentBin, we sold through technical recruiters. So like if an account had a bunch of technical recruiters in it, like that was enough for us to want to sell to them, right? So like then that's where a place like LinkedIn would be really helpful. But at the same time, there's also like leading indicators of demand. Like if an organization was hiring lots of software engineers, then even if they didn't have a technical recruiter, then like we would care about them as well. So then it's like, okay, well, where do you get that information? Do you manually pull it off of Indeed? Do you go to a third-party provider? And so just kind of thinking about like what these signals are that are like leading indicators of like the humans that are in the account that can use your stuff, or the demand that's in the account that indicates that you should that they should care about your solution. That's like the kind of like the framework for thinking about that there.
I like to almost like reverse engineer BANT, where it's like, okay, budget, authority, need, and timing. How do I go find the signals that are going to show if they have budget, if I'm talking to the right authority, if they have a need right now, if the timing is right. So, the signals could be anything from, oh, they just went on a hiring spree, or they put up a bunch of different job listings for the, the area that you're selling into, all the way down to, oh, this is interesting. There's a employee with another city location. They just opened up another office. What are some signals or triggers or things like that you can get that will show you that they have budget or that they're a growing company? Obviously, there's like tools out there. I think Mattermark was doing growth scores. This is another one that'll allow you to see, what areas of these companies are growing. Matt, so going back to kind of, the tools, like what does your stack look like in terms of, finding out these signals? And, obviously Bombora is a part of that. What else?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think I'll answer that in a second, but I think one of the components that we should also be thinking about here in terms of signal is the install data, that technology install. What are the, as you mentioned, stack, right? What are those components that make up your technology stack, your infrastructure? And there are companies out there like an HG Data, for example, who do a really good job of putting forward and surfacing that information as well, which can be a strong indicator. For us, we leveraged EverString as sort of our fit modeling to build a list, and I essentially looked at companies I had worked with when I was working in sales at Serious Decisions, usual suspects in terms of the enterprise accounts, companies we are already working with that are clients today, as well as those that are active prospects. Essentially built a model, a list of 510 companies, fed that into EverString to develop that fit model. And then EverString and other tools like it allow you to blow those models out to almost as wide as you want. Initially, it was about 90,000 accounts. I took that with a huge grain of salt and began to really focus on right industries. So focused on some core industries in terms of network and security, IT, computer software, computer hardware, a few others. Looked at a fit score of 50 plus, and then looked at a revenue band over 25 million. That got me pretty quickly to about 3,700 accounts, which then tools like EverString and Lattice and Mintigos and others allow you to actually push that into your CRM. So we started there and then added another filter to say all of that criteria, and now only those accounts over $1 billion in revenue, and quickly got down to about 284 really pretty key targeted accounts. And that's where we then push that into Salesforce, align the sales reps to those targets. And
Max, I think your framework of saying how can we fill out BANT ahead of time, that is like the most succinct way I've heard of putting it that way. Because I think what a lot of people, I was just having this conversation with an SDR director the other day, and she was like, well, I just want this like magical like data source that has it all. And I was like, it's like, welcome to sales ops, dude. Like, I mean, don't we all want that? But if you think about like BANT, like Mattermark, one of the knocks that kind of I had historically had against is like, oh, it's growing, they've raised money or whatever. It's like, all right, like budget. Okay, yeah. Like these are all the places that have budget, and so you need like, so it's not budget on its face. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Do they have the need? Oh, they have the need because they're hiring a bunch of people. Where did we get that data? Oh, we built a crawler on Indeed, or I think actually Datanyze just shipped like they're now crawling job postings or whatever. So like, show me all the accounts that are hiring for engineers. Okay, cool. Now I have need, and like I have budget because I can merge in Crunchbase data. But now, who's the human? Who's the contact object with the authority? Oh, crap, that's over here on LinkedIn. And then timeline was always just like a disaster, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing you were talking about, Matt, is like that active demand versus like, what was it again? What was the phrase that Sirius had?
Which target demand is for basically the total addressable universe, the very top, and then followed by active, those that are doing research.
Yeah. Like we can get that, but then the way that traditionally we've done that is like by having SDRs go and like bird dog folks, and you have like a disco call, and you're like, okay, cool, you do have budget, you do have authority, you do have need. Oh, this isn't a priority right now, and then now we have to like bird dog that either the SDR does, the AE does, or whatever, and that's like a big place where efficiency is lost because you spend a lot of cycles setting those meetings. Now, sometimes you can close those if you can really shuck and jive well, but like sometimes it's just like, yeah, this is not a priority right now. I get that your solution is sick. I got 3 things that are above it. But I think that like using that framework that Max just talked about, like what is, like here's your vance, how do you fill in the data for that? And then like the timeline thing I think is the thing. Well, I guess that's like inbound and like Google search and stuff like that is kind of where that's helped, or like behavioral around like, marketing lead scoring and things like behavioral scoring. Well, like that's kind of always been the place where it's been weakest, but you can get pretty far with like, ban if you get the data.
Yeah, you're just cutting your deal cycles. I mean, you're cherry picking. You're ranking the low-hanging fruit. And if you start from scratch, you have no way to figure out what's your low-hanging fruit, what's going to close the fastest, what who your ideal customer profile, like what it really is. Out of who's a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10 on that list. And it's not just in tech anymore. I mean, I'm seeing hedge funds use this. There's a piece of software. I was having a conversation with somebody that's not in our tech audience, and he was telling me about there's something called FlightAware, and I actually use it to track my flights. So you can type in your flight code, and it'll tell you where your plane is going over and how long it's going to take. And so one hedge fund put a $1 billion bet on a merger because they knew the CEO's private plane tail number, tracked it on FlightAware, found out that it spent 3 weeks in Germany where their competitor was. Sure enough, there was a merger, and they made $400 million. So, if you can figure out how to really understand this predictive piece and these signals and these triggers and intent data and all this kind of stuff, you can get so far ahead of the game, and it's really, you don't need software to do it. I mean, there's like simple stuff that you can do, whether it's with basic web scrapers or I have a lot of it in hacking sales that we spoke about, but there's so many new companies out now. Like I don't even think Everstring was around when I wrote that, but there's a lot of tools out there that you can use and free resources even to go out and get this information. So
yeah, and like there's tons of free stuff that you can do where you can go and look. Like another budgetary signifier, people always use like fundraising as a budgetary signifier, but another budgetary signifier are they buying now, right? And so a good example of that, like one of the companies that I work with is a company called Next Way of Hire. They do recruitment branding stuff, like kind of like employee testimonials through webcams and stuff. And so you can go and you can find organizations that care about recruiting brand either by looking at their recruiting website and saying like, oh, do they have videos on there? Is it like spiffed up? Or going over to like Glassdoor and saying, oh, do they have the regular Glassdoor profile, or do they have the one where it has their job postings, like the company's job postings here, because that indicates that they're paying for that. Okay, cool. I actually haven't seen any software, like obviously folks like DataNice and DataFox and stuff like that, they'll crawl the technographics that are on a site, and like HC Data kind of like has insight into tech that's like inside the firewall, but I haven't seen anyone aggregating like spend other places, right? Like another example is like our organization's spending on Yelp. There might be folks who figure out if people are spending on Google AdWords. I don't know of any solutions that do that, but like essentially signifiers of existing budgetary expense and obviously need by virtue of the consumption of like complementary solutions to your solution. A lot of the stuff is for free.
Yeah.
I wonder if you see anything even from a philanthropic efforts perspective. Is that an indicator that they're out there in a big way, spending dollars to drive their philanthropic efforts? And the other thing I'd say just about BANT is I think it's a perfect framework. I think it's a great way to look at things. And depending on the product or service that a company is bringing to market, you may have to be careful and take that with a grain of salt as well, because if it's a new disruptive, new concept, or a new paradigm type of demand, the ability to actually get to BANT qualification is pretty severely lacking, right? There's not an established need, therefore there's not a time frame, there may not even be budget for it. So some of these other indicators that we're talking about become really important.
Oh yeah. You definitely have to look at the complementary and competitive products that they're using. And in a situation where you're creating a market, it's a lot more complementary than it is competitive. So, if you're very close to MailChimp, but not exactly MailChimp, you should want to know who all of MailChimp's customers are anyway, because you can piggyback on that. So there are companies like Datanyze, and I think somebody asked, what are the free tools? There's tons of these tools that'll give you, free trials or even like freemium models where it's not even a trial. You get to use like a decent amount of the product. But there's Owler is another one of them. There's Intricately, another one of them. So we'll keep moving on from here. We're getting into developing a sales rep day-to-day schedule. So Matt, you want to tell us what your current sales rep day-to-day schedule looks like, and kind of how you went about building that process, and obviously tying it together with the overall kind of topic here?
Yeah, sure. I saw actually a couple of postings from some of the MSP group about this concept of proactive versus reactive, right? And really focusing reps' behaviors on the right things. I think there's another piece of that as well, which is something just going through a number of different sales and prospecting training programs over the years has become a really important distinction for me, which is this idea of prospecting versus cold calling or outbound. And I think a lot of times we kind of lump them together. And in my mind, the way we've approached it is prospecting really is almost that preparation work, right? So who are the accounts we should be targeting? What are the right personas or profiles or contacts within that account? And then also there are companies out there that have developed concepts like 3x3 research. So what are the three sort of factoids that I can find about any individual in 3 minutes of research that will help me land a more specific message? Another one I love there is why you now, right? So rather than making it all about us, making it about our product, making it about, hey, I saw you, we're connected, that might be a piece of it, but it's really about why should this resonate with you now? And those are obviously all concepts. Some of those companies, and just the fact that they've done so much of this training around efficiency for sales, outreach, and prospecting, have also suggested that Tuesdays, for example, is among the worst day for the outbound effort. So the way we've aligned is actually taking Tuesday to do a lot of that prospecting preparation work, and or if I'm going to have a couple of calls, be it virtual calls or field calls, I'm going to try to schedule them for Tuesday and then give myself the ability to really prepare for what we found anyway, Thursday morning and afternoon and Friday afternoon to be the best for the cold calling. So that's how we've orchestrated the cadence anyway.
Yeah, I think what the way that I kind of like up level it is to think about like the design of your operational cadence, right? Like we talk a lot about like designing your sales stack. How does everything like tie together? But then there's the design and intentionality around what are the things that an SDR or an AE or an AM has to do in order to get to, in the case of an SDR, 5, depending on the ACV, 15, SQLs a month, or 5 or whatever, or an AE getting to 70K in ARR booked, or whatever it is. Like, that's the goal. Then back out of it, what needs to happen, and then when exactly will that happen? And then how is that cadenced out such that we know that that's actually happening? So I think, Matt, your point about like prospecting as a concept and it being lumped together, well, if you don't break these things out, then people will naturally either, humans are messy. So what they'll do is they'll tend towards the thing that's maybe less unpleasant. right? Or they'll because we're all subject to like recency bias or availability bias or what have you, we'll execute on the thing that's at the top of our inbox as opposed to the thing that's blocked out that we ought to be doing right now, right? And so I think that to the extent that you can think about what the goal is and then back out to the things that need to be done and then when they ought to be done and then be prescriptive about that or at least suggestive. I mean, I'm a big fan of prescription because I'm kind of that guy. But at least give guide rails to generally speaking, these are the hours during which we should be calling. And I should see your metrics, your calling and your emailing metrics, be doing that during these times of the day, specifically because we know that that's, A, it needs to be done, it needs to be prioritized, B, these are the good times to do it. So this is not the time when you do research. This is not the time when we have team meetings. We have team meetings or one-on-one meetings pushed to the edges of the day rather than during prime calling time, right? Or this is the time during the week or the hour during the day pushed across the whole week where we do pipeline follow-up. Because otherwise, if we don't have that specifically scheduled out, well, maybe it never happens and we end up with a stale pipeline that hasn't been tended to. So I think it's really about thinking about what the goal is and then breaking down the constituent parts and then making sure that they're actually happening. Because otherwise, it's too important to leave to each individual just kind of trying to concoct it on their own.
And you kind of actually work with, this is kind of your space. You work with these companies and you see, who's doing these activities, right? So have you seen any correlation with slacking reps and not having time blocked off by their managers versus companies that do have time chunked out? Here's what you need to do, when you need to do it, everybody does it, and then at the other times you do something else?
I haven't seen that level of granularity yet, but what I have seen is the opportunity cost associated when individuals allow themselves to do too much of something. So a good example of this would be one of the things at Talent that we totally screwed up, that in retrospect it makes sense that it wasn't good, was if you have reps, we were an inside sales motion, our ACV was 10 to 15K, what have you, so it's pretty transactional-ish, not like a Yelp sale, but definitely not like, MMSQL or Cloudera sale. And so sometimes we would have reps that would have 5 or 6 demos a day. That's insane, because if you have that every day, when are you having your second meetings and your third meetings? When are you executing proposals and all that sort of stuff? And so what I have seen is when you see there's definitely you can see it in the metrics where if people get out of band on things like customer facing meetings where there can be too much of a good thing, you actually will end up seeing rises in the number of untouched opportunities or stale ops in somebody's pipe because they're overloaded, right?
Yeah. Things go peaks and valleys, and it looks like one of those.
Which, the example that we see there the most is the prototypical kind of the beginning of the quarter is we're filling the pipe, right? And then the second half of the quarter is that's when we blow it all out. And then the beginning of the next quarter, we're crap, my pipe is empty. So you definitely see those peaks and valleys, and we obviously like to smooth that out to the extent we can. But at the same time, you don't want to smooth it out in such a way where you're constantly context switching and becoming inefficient. Which I think kind of goes back to having a either prescriptive or at least suggested cadence that then can be measured and then is bounded by either meeting invites on the calendar or stand-ups or team meetings and things like that.
Yeah, I think the prescriptive approach is really important. I couldn't agree with you more. I've taken it as far as actually blocking it out on the calendar and having those times be set, the focus of that time. It also makes it really easy. We know we've got to inspect what we expect, right? So if we're going to actually really hold people accountable to this, the easiest way is at this moment right now, the people that's sitting around you in the pod or whatever the case might be are supposed to be on the phone calling. It's really easy to see who's not actually adhering to the activity right now. And it makes it really easy to just have that direct conversation with them. Listen, we agreed this is exactly what this time is for. You're obviously not using it for that.
Yeah, go for it.
Importantly, and it's not just like and by the way, this is the time that this is for, because Matt's a mean dickhead. It's like no, because we know that this is the thing that will drive you to success. Remember, we talked about that goal. We want to get you to 15 customer-facing meetings created. Here's the historical data that indicates across our 10 SDRs that this is what's required in order to get here, which is why we have this prescription, right? So it's not like I made this up just to pee in your Wheaties. This is to make you successful.
Yeah, it's definitely consensus, I think, between the three of us that you should have time blocked out for your reps day to day. And Matt, did you have anything to add? I was going to go on to the next point.
No, we can move on.
Cool. So proof of concepts, next piece. Pete, you want to start? This was a pretty good thread on the MSP message boards. How do you handle proof of concepts?
Yeah, I think that a POCs or trials or whatever you want to call them can be very powerful parts of your selling motion. But the flip side is they can also be huge time sucks, right? And so I think the thing that everyone should really ask themselves, and they can be huge time sucks, they can also be a crutch for reps, where all I got to do is sell the trial, as opposed to doing some actual pipe hitting, persuasive, evangelical selling, and actually getting somebody to a deal. So I think that you have to be careful there. So at TalentBin, one of the things that we struggled with early on, and I think this was a junior sales leader's problem, was allowing reps to sell trials. We can just get you in a trial or what have you, which then you have to recognize that it creates all sorts of, it puts tons of pressure either on the rep or on CS. It's especially bad. It's just you throw it over the fence to CS and be like, okay, cool, go sell this for me, thanks, man. And so I think you just need to be mindful of that and ask yourself, do you really need to do this? Because a lot of times if you're in a SaaS environment, you don't necessarily need to do that. You can sell an initial deal. You can make it paid. Or if you're doing a really good job with when people ask for a trial or ask for a POC, oftentimes what they're doing is they're saying I'm not quite convinced right now. And what you can potentially do is you can convince them with something other than a POC, oh, well, what would make you convinced? How about talking to a couple of our existing customers? How about, oh, yeah, you're right. I asked for a trial, but really just what I wanted was more comfort. Oh, okay, fantastic. So, I think the first question with respect to POCs would be, do you actually need them first? Because they can definitely elongate a sales cycle. Sometimes they're not necessary if you're selling infrastructure, network stuff or database stuff or what have you. But if you're selling in a SaaS world, sometimes you should definitely be looking to ship the contract first.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I came in here to Bombora in January, and there were a number of POCs that were intended to be 3-month POCs with some very major clients of ours that turned into 6-month and 9-month and 12-month perpetual extensions of POCs. So I pretty much banned the word POC at this point. In fact, I was joking that the next person I heard it from owes me $100 for every subsequent abuse of the word. But what we have found really impactful is this concept of validation testing. So, we have a data product. They want to know the data works. And there are many ways that we can validate that data. So we've actually moved to a model where we're also building a subscription revenue model. So a POC for 3 months really doesn't help our calls in terms of the ARR. And what we've begun to do is getting clients to a point where they've said, okay, we see value in this. We want to validate it. We sign them onto an annual contract, and we give them an out after the first 30 days. And during that first 30 days, we create this hands-on collaborative white glove experience where all we do is look at the different workflows where we've discussed in the sales cycle the data is going to live and have impact. And we spend that time validating those workflows and validating the data within it, helping identify additional workflows, and doing testing so that at the end of those 30 days, obviously we want them to not opt out, but perhaps even more importantly is by the end of that 30 days, we've got their team engaged, we've gotten our team and CS engaged right from the beginning, and we've validated the data to the point where we don't spend time in the future asking if, is this science fiction? Does it really work? Is the data real? Instead, we spend all our time figuring out additional ways for them to leverage the data and get value out of it. And so far, it's been working tremendously well. It also takes that whole crutch of the rep. It also takes the whole, like, what's the next step, right? And it gives us the ability to say, well, this is how it works. Are you ready to engage in that fashion? If not, if you don't have the bandwidth, if you don't have the right people right now, then we're better off waiting. And we're not getting stuck in deals at the end of the cycle anymore. We're moving them forward, and it's been working really well.
I just wanted to say something about like POCs, like, because Matt and I are just like, boo. But I think there are scenarios where they can be powerful. Just make sure that you're being intellectually honest and not being like, oh yeah, we do POCs because, like, asking somebody to close is hard, so we instead ask them for the soft thing. But there can be scenarios where, like, if your product works great and it's just like stupid obvious once you get it like turned on, and part of that can be a little bit of product management. So Sequoia published this ebook called like the Sales Ready Product. If you just Google Sales Ready Product, it's really cool because there's like the demo ready product, and then there's like the sales ready product. Where, and one of the examples of this, there was this company called Postini back in the day that did spam filter. It's one of the early Bayesian spam filters. And one of the cool things about it was, I think it was SaaS-based. It wasn't on-prem like Barracuda or any of those other guys. And what you could do is, like, the rep could go into the head of IT or the CIO or whatever and be like, hey, let's just do a trial where you can just point your mail records or MX records or whatever they're called at the Postini service, and we'll see what happens to your spam levels. So they would do that. Like, that's all they had to sell. They would do that, and then spam levels would drop by like 80% or whatever. And so then the rep could turn around at the end of that like POC and be like, it's kind of like the scene in Ghostbusters where they're like, well, we can just put this ghost right back, right? Like in this case, it's like, oh, did you want all your spam back? And then of course they'd be like, oh, no, of course not, right? So if you have that scenario, then exploit it, right? There's another company I work with called Chorus. They do conversation intelligence. And so one of the things they've observed is that when they get folks signed up for a POC and reps, like their calls are being recorded and then parsed out and automatically transcribed and things are getting pulled out, it's just so much like data porn for the reps that like automatically summarize things. Like it's just kind of like, oh my God. So they've gotten to the point where the product, like if you can just get it across the door, like the doorstep, it can kind of like, I don't want to say sell itself, but at least it's really helpful to the rep, and it doesn't actually elongate the sales cycle. So if you can do that, then you should exploit it. And then moreover, you as a seller with product management, you can think about what the features might be that can help that process. So then even if you're doing that though, then that means that like, okay, is that now an official part of our sales motion? Great. In which case now that has to be instrumented and part of that cadence. Like, today is the day where we review all of our POCs. Like, because that is part of our sales motion, that is now, Tuesday morning or what have you. And like, so again, it can't be left just like up to the individual to determine how they're going to manage those things.
There's even a sort of a budding concept of the PQL, the product qualified lead, that I've seen out there, which is someone, especially in a freemium or a SaaS model, okay, they've engaged with the product, much like Pete's just mentioning here, and they've taken some trigger action that says, okay, now they've engaged and they're more likely to become a paying customer. So there's definitely a place, to your point, for the POC or the product qualified lead in all of this.
Yeah, I think the key is don't do a POC unless you have a plan in place. Like you said, you do the white glove treatment, for that first month. Even before you do anything with that customer, you should have a plan laid out about how they're going to be successful. I had a call with a CRO friend of mine who just took a new role at a company, and it was actually the perfect product for us. It's just too expensive, and he was trying to get us to buy it, and I'm trying to do the math, and we're going through it, and he's like, all right, well, we don't do trials, but I'll do a trial for you, but we have to come up with exactly how we're going to see it successful. And I was like, at that price that you're trying to charge me, I don't ever see it being successful. It's like almost impossible. It's not for a company like us. So we went back and forth on it, and we didn't end up doing anything with them because we couldn't figure out what that plan would look like to make it a success in the first, 30, 60, 90 days, where he's going to end up with a paying customer at the end, because we're a small company, bootstrapped. We don't have that kind of money to spend on something like that.
But isn't it so great to like do that analysis up front and like don't piss away anyone's time, right? Like let's figure out, because I mean essentially that's what selling is, right? Selling creates economic value through mutual trade, right? So like let's do the analysis to figure out if you're going to get value out of this, and then give us money in exchange for that value. And because in this way, like the analysis that you guys did, Max, ahead of time, it saves everyone like all sorts of brain damage. Right now, ideally, back that all the way back to the beginning of our conversation around automated prospecting and kind of like account discovery. Now we can see the leading indicators of the stuff that would make it obvious that this customer would get value out of us. Well, then we can make sure that we're not having those conversations with folks who are not ideal customer profile, which is kind of like you guys got further down the pipe until you figured out like, okay, this isn't going to make sense for us. Well, wouldn't it be fantastic for that sales org to figure that out at the top of the pipe and then keep that, keep those conversations from happening? Or alternatively, something that can come out of that, which, by having those honest conversations up front as opposed to just having a drawn out POC that wastes everyone's time, you might have just pointed to that there need to be a better pricing nuance. That maybe there needs to be different pricing for an organization like Sales Hacker, because in 30, 60, 90 days, predicated on their current pricing, you guys aren't going to get value. Okay, cool. Like maybe there's another way to price that. And then all of a sudden now, we're opening up a whole nother channel of ideal customer profile folks.
I'm going to get to a few questions real quick. So we have somebody asking around selling a service where there's no data validation demo, and a trial engagement is not as easy as sign up and use it for 2 weeks. What are your thoughts on what they can do? I guess that's something that you can't really run a proof of concept on, can you?
They sell what kind of services?
Maxwell, what are the services that you're selling?
It's like a professional service?
I'd imagine it could be a services business where it's maybe like a Blue Wolf or like a Salesforce consultancy or something like that.
Matt, you guys at Sirius, you guys sold services, right?
We did, yeah. We sold services almost exclusively, advisory and consulting. A lot of that really came down to the value, identifying the value in the buyer's mind. So what are the existing pain points? Highly consultative, right? Identifying what are the existing pain points. What does it mean to actually move the needle on those pain points for them? So establishing some monetary or economic value associated with overcoming that pain point. And then oftentimes it was easy as saying, well, if we could drive better process and you were able to convert your leads at X% at an average deal size of Y, in and of itself, this justifies the spend. That's one way. There's also this whole concept, which I love, of the professional and the personal value. So really identifying for the individual or the economic decision maker, what's it going to mean for your career to have access to either this community of thought leaders or to the specific bodies of research or to these models and frameworks? How much time is it going to save you from having to reinvent the wheel versus actually being able to plug and play with some existing tried and true models? And so that was a lot of the approach that we took.
Yeah, I think, go for it.
Go ahead, Max. No, after you, Max.
I was going to say, this proof of concept is a tool in your arsenal. Like if you're going hunting, that's a knife. And if you're selling services and you can't do a trial or proof of concept, then you need to have you use your other tools. You have a bow and arrow, which is your references. He says they build custom software. Whether you're a custom software shop or a services shop of some other kind, you need to find other ways to highlight the value instead of a trial. So how about go lining up 3 references, really good customers that are going to give references or back channels or things like that. So it's just another, a trial is just another weapon in your arsenal that you're able to use for that type of sell. And then when you switch to the type of sale, you have to swap out the artillery that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
My background before I started Talentban, I worked at a company called VMware in the product marketing org and did some product management as well. And so product marketing can really help that, where you can take the success that has happened previously, because I'm sure Maxwell has probably done like a bunch of different custom software development, and then if you can capture that in the form of like a pull quote with a smiling face of a customer, right? And that's just a slide, right? Or if you want to get sexier, it can just be you having a Google Hangout with the client and talking through the project and the success that came from it, and record it with, QuickTime recording or what have you. So to the extent that you can take these validators of success and then package them into collateral, it can be, it doesn't have to be high sheen. Everyone's like, oh, we need case studies, and PDFs and whatever. No, what you need is like a client saying, yeah, we worked with Maxwell's software shop, and it was in order to stand up an iPhone app, and it was totally amazing. And here's the app right here, and you can see it has these scores on the App Store, and like we would totally work with them again. Boop, packaged, and now oh hey, I don't actually know if I want to do business with you, Maxwell. Well, here, just watch this YouTube video, man. Or actually, here we have 5 of them, right? So I think that's a way that you can do that.
Yeah, I like the power of the reference, the actual client reference as well, to put one in touch with another to use as a qualifier. And we did this heavily with Serious Decisions. Like, well, I want to talk to a reference. Okay, actually confirming that you're at the right point in the buying process to say, well, we've gotten thus far. This you're telling me is the final validation point. So we need to agree that if I'm going to put you in touch with my client, their time obviously is important as ours, that you're actually at a point where when they validate this for you, you're ready to do business. And it was a great litmus test to see if they're just kicking tires or just pushing you off, or if they're real.
Matt, let's you finish with this quick question here, but how do you deal with revenue recognition when clients provide a 30-day out clause? When you provide clients a 30-day out clause, when they cancel if they're not happy, what do you do in that situation?
There's a couple pieces. The rep doesn't get paid until it converts. So we don't have that. We pay you, we claw it back scenario, because that's never really fun for anybody to administer or for the rep's experience and motivation. And the recognition, once it's converted, it gets recognized as ARR, or an annual recurring revenue on a subscription basis.
Okay, awesome. Getting into our last topic here, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, yay or nay? Pete, we'll start with you. I mean, more than yay or nay, how do you see people using it these days? What are the key pieces of data that you can pull out of that, key pieces of context that you can pull out of LinkedIn? I guess the difference between LinkedIn and LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I think that it's kind of changed over time. It goes back to that great framework that you brought up earlier, Max, of from an account identification and qualification, proactive account identification and qualification standpoint. Nothing's going to beat LinkedIn with respect to authority and contact discovery. You're going to find, now the contact information kind of sucks, because sending in-mails to people versus having their email, especially with all the open and click tracking and kind of automation you can do with email, LinkedIn in-mails are not nearly there. The thing, of course, the product I always wanted as a sales leader was LinkedIn Sales Navigator Sales Ops Edition that cost me like $50,000 a year, and I could just pull whatever I wanted out of there and shove it into Salesforce. Now, they didn't want to sell that because they want individuals using LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So on the one hand, obviously you can't quibble with the quality of the people and the contact objects. The other thing too that one of my frustrations with Sales Navigator kind of goes back to what Matt was saying earlier about prospecting being this monolithic thing. Oh, are you prospecting, or are you just kind of browsing through LinkedIn aimlessly? Oh, wait, now there's this feed on the homepage of people's thought leadership postings where reps can goof off commenting on stuff. Oh, okay, cool. I'm not sure if that's actually all that helpful. So to the extent that then usage of Navigator can be instrumented and pushed into Salesforce such that it fits into that operational cadence where I can inspect what I expect, to the extent that that can happen, and they can improve upon that, that will make that better. I think right now, I'm a little suspect of having a bunch of SDRs using this thing for what is it now, like $80 a month or $100 a month or what have you, when like I would prefer sales operations or marketing operations to fill the database for those folks. But I think they're getting to the point where it can be a helpful engagement tool as long as the activity information is passed over to a system that where you can instrument that activity actually is happening and like response rates and things like that. Right now, that's kind of missing.
Yeah, I'm starting to explore right now use of like a Zoom Info type of tool.
Yeah.
With some integrations with LinkedIn, so you can be doing your searches through LinkedIn, through Sales Navigator, but also using that contact level product, right, to actually pump this right into Salesforce. The other thing that I just saw for the first time from our LinkedIn rep was this Point Drive product that they've built, where you can actually now share content, and you can, for example, point someone to a Point Drive page where you can have assets loaded into that page that you've customized for them after your interaction with them, and then actually track it, much like there are other technologies that do this, but track to see, okay, what's been consumed, have they come to the page, have they looked at the specific assets, and so on and so forth. So there's some value in that. I think the real point is, how do we operationalize all that back into our central hub, whatever that CRM is, especially if it's Salesforce.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, we're going to open it up for questions. If anybody has any more questions, I think I'm going to go back to one asked by Rick a little while back. How do you handle a shift to a prescriptive approach to the sales task when you have an experienced rep, especially one that has been successful using their own methodology? Pete, I'll let you take that one.
Well, good point. Well, so I think there's an interesting question there, of course, is like, there's the definition of success. So you're saying, hey, how do you change to, oh, sorry about that, guys. How do you change to a, thank you, Google Calendar. How do you change to a prescriptive methodology when you have somebody who's already got their process? I think the first thing is like, do we actually know that their process is good? Right? Like, they might close $50,000 of business a month, but why is that the right number? Why isn't it 80? Right? Why isn't it 100? And so I think this kind of goes back to the design of the sales motion and the refinement of it, where you could say, oh, well, like, I'm getting my job done. I'm closing $50,000 in business or $80,000 in business a month. And then you then inspect what that looks like from a sales motion standpoint. You're like, yeah, but you're doing that with like 5 customer-facing meetings a week. What do you do with the rest of the time? Can we get that to 10? Is there a reason why we can't do that? Okay, well, if we tried that, what would that look like? Obviously, you're going to make more money, right? Like, I'm not going to keep that all for the business. So I think that that's the first thing to think about is there a thing that's working? Is it actually working at optimum efficiency? And then if it's not, then we have a rationale. It's like, okay, cool. Well, like, let's see what we can do if we can get you to 10 meetings a week, Mr. Outside Seller. And don't you think that that would be good for? Wouldn't you like a new BMW M5? I would like to get you one. Let's go ahead and get that on the calendar. So now we have an actual like business rationale for changing that sales motion. So that's the way that I would approach that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's working now by whatever definition you're using for success. How scalable and how long-term is it in terms of being successful? Is there potentially a point where if you don't continue to convert at the same rate based on the number of accounts that are in your name or based on the opportunities you've developed, you could suddenly experience that, that trough of, productivity that any good sales rep wants to avoid. And I think trying to unpack that and get to a point where you can back it with some information, some data, and some what if, a little bit of FUD in their mind, and get them to then align around the process, helping prevent that from even being a possibility, can be important.
Great. Last thing before we sign off for the day here is, Matt, tell us a little bit about Bombora.
Bombora. So if we think back to some of the concepts we talked about in the very beginning around the demand waterfall, this target demand being total addressable market, Bombora's life mission is to tell you the active demand piece. So our data tells us 15 to 20% of your total addressable market in the B2B world is more likely to engage with you, that is at the account level, more likely to engage with your marketing, with your sales efforts, etc., based on their level of research and a spike in that research around topics that you care about based on your offering. So we have a vast network of websites that allow us to track that content consumption behavior. That helps us drive to who are the companies, the accounts that are most likely to engage with you right now.
Awesome. Thank you for being our host, our partner for this webinar. Thanks to Pete, who had to jump off at the 50 marker. We got him off late. And thank you all for joining us. Hope you got a lot of value out of it, and we'll see you on the next one.
Okay, have a great day, everybody.